Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Purple Pill Philosophy's guest tonight is the science enthusiast, Wayne Fillmore. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm doing all right. I can't complain.
Tell the dear audience all about yourself. Were you a non believer at one point, or were you always a believer? And what led you to doing what you do now?
So, first off, nice to meet you guys. My first
Likewise.
time coming on, and for the people who are watching, I am Wayne Fillmore. I am of course, it's in the name, science enthusiast, Christian, um, spokesperson, PR guy for science, um, and all around just an educator. Um, I started doing this years ago. I just decided to make a YouTube channel and just document all of the things I found out about science and religion. And a few years after that, um, I changed my beliefs as far as coming out of younger creationism into old of creationism into evolutionary creationism. I have coordinated discussions with Fazell Rana, Dr. Hugh Ross, Michael Heiser. I've debated Steve McCrae. I've debated King Crocoduck, uh, Kent Hovind. So I've been around for a minute. I was never an atheist. I've never not believed in God, but there was a time where I was a younger creationist and I didn't accept evolution. And then I changed my mind and I accepted evolution and I still hold to my faith.
What's all that been like?
Uh, it's been a wild ride. Some people think that you just don't believe in the Bible anymore because you accept evolution. Some people just don't care. And other people want to find out what made me change my beliefs. So there's three people, there's three sides. Uh, Basically, when people come out on the other side of this journey.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's always funny because I've always heard about the whole young Earth creationists see the Flintstones as a documentary.
Nah, that's not completely false.
They re-
Uh,
they did it live action in the '90s, reenacted the whole thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, dealing with younger creationists it can be, it can take its toll because younger creationists, they don't mean to do any harm, but they do more harm than what they think they're doing. Like for example, Ken Ham, Ken Hovind, the younger creationists over on that side of the fence, they are atheist factory makers because when people grow up, and they go to college and they get an education, now they understand that, oh, these scientists, these people who Ken Ham, Ken Hovind, Jason Lau, all of these big younger names, scientists really are not these evil people who sit inside of a boardroom or a lab room plotting against Christians trying to disprove anything. Scientists are just regular, everyday people like you and I who have families and life and kids and stuff. And they're just doing their best to find out about the world. And it just so happens that younger creationism just doesn't comport with the reality that we live in. And that's not a bad thing. It's not evil or capricious because the reality does not fit their interpretation of the Bible.
Yeah, it's like the back in the Middle Ages, which they like to characterize as the Dark Ages. The church actually went along with this system that was developed earlier. That you have two books: the book of the Scriptures and the book of nature. If one ended up contradicting the other, then that means their interpretation was off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And
yeah,
that's exactly what it is.
mhm, yeah. So one of my first questions that I wanted to ask you is, Has getting away from young Earth creationism hurt or helped you on your spiritual journey?
I would say that definitely getting away from younger creationism has helped me in more ways than I could even think of. Because when I got out of younger creationism, a lot of people don't know this part of my story, but J. Warner Wallace, the author of Cold Case Christianity, he actually is one of my biggest influences on why I accepted evolution. I actually had to retrain the way I thought because when I was so in deep inside of younger creationism, they have this philosophy where they teach people that there's historical science and observational science, and unless you can see it or unless somebody was there, we just don't know. Which means we have a lot of people we need to release out of prison because a lot of the murders, nobody was there. Nobody saw it. There were no cameras. Maybe you killed somebody in a blind spot. We don't know. Let them go. Let them walk. Right, Kinham? Well, no, that's not how the world works. But the world does work in a way where we can have circumstantial evidence and we can walk into our crime scene or a room and we can put together what happened based off the evidence that's left in the room. That's how we solve cold cases. Cold cases, there are no living eyewitnesses in most of the cases. Most of the eyewitnesses in cold cases are dead, and all they have is circumstantial evidence. And they are solving these 40, 50-year-old closed cases with only the evidence that's in the room. Um, and so, yeah, Kenham is definitely wrong in that regard. And uh, leaving younger creationism has helped me in that way because I was able to retrain how I thought. I mean, I think in a completely different way. And I've noticed that people who hold to that view, or not even just younger creationism, but a lot of people who tend to be on the more religious side in general, they tend to fear science and investigation and rational thought because it deals with the unknown. It deals with things we don't know about, but that's okay. God wants us to go out and investigate the world and find out new things about reality because the more we find out about reality, the more we find out about God. So
And there's propaganda perpetuated by new atheists who pay lip service to science and propagate atheism in the name of science.
true, true, true. Yeah, that is also
Well,
true as
I mean,
well.
I always remember what's funny is like not many people actually know about is that when evolution was first being brought up, like with Darwin, what was funny about that is like Darwin had plenty of theists who supported his ideas. Some of them were his friends. Uh, and what was funny about it is that some of the people that really started getting the whole contradicting with the Bible was atheists and agnostics of the day, like Darwin's bulldog.
Hmm.
I can't remember his name. He was an agnostic. He actually coined the term. Uh,
Yeah.
oh yeah, Huxley is his name. Thomas Huxley,
Right.
Okay.
and that's how initially. And young Earth creationism as a movement is relatively recent.
Oh yeah.
It's only been. I mean, you can make the argument that traces of it have been around for since the early church fathers, but it hasn't really become a sort of popular movement until like around the 1950s.
And around the 19th century with the Seventh Day Adventists.
Yeah, yeah. Younger creationism in its modern form can be traced back to George McCready Price, who got his theology from Ellen G. White. And George McCready Price, he actually is, you could say, well, you could say Kent Hovind is George McCready Price. George McCready Price didn't have an education, but somehow his wife was able to get him a job at a college in the Maritides, which is in Canada. And George McCready Price would debate college professors on evolution until they would get so frustrated they didn't want to debate them anymore. And then, and then, George McCready Price found Henry Morris. Henry Morris was another younger creationist who has similar beliefs. And George McCready Price used Henry Morris's PhD so he can try and publish work on the flood. So then they just started writing their own material and their own creationist peer review literature because they couldn't get their hypotheses past the peer review process. Then they decided to write a book called The Genesis Flood, and that's when this whole thing took off. So younger creationism originally was called flood geology, and then Seventh-day Adventists came back around the table and they decided to change the actual name of it from flood geology to younger creationism. And so that's how it was very, very well hidden. And so a lot of people who are even following younger criticism, they don't know the history behind it. Like, where does this 6,000 year number come from? The Bible doesn't say it. And I'm pretty sure most of the people who follow younger creationism have never added up the genealogies on their own by themselves. They just take somebody else's word for it. You don't know if the genealogies really add up to 6,000. You're taking the word of King Ham. Where did he get that number from? He probably won't tell you, but it's on his website. Answered in Genesis. In the 1600s, uh, a bishop, an Anglican
Yeah,
bishop, James
Bishop
Usher.
Usher.
Yep, he was the guy who came up with the chronology of the Bible, and he said that Adam and Eve were made in 4004 BC on October, and Adam was made at like 8 in the morning, and Eve was made at like what 3 in the afternoon or something like that.
Under what time zone?
Um, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. Right under what time zone?
Huh?
Eastern Standard. Who knows?
I mirrored a video on the biblical genealogies and how they work. Like, their ages were not, they didn't live to be hundreds of years old. You look at them long enough, you'll realize that they're symbolic. Like, most of
Yeah.
them end in sevens, and half of them are either end in fives or twos. And
Yep.
yeah, like Enoch himself, his Sumerian counterpart, was associated with the Sumerian city where they worship the sun, which is where 365 comes from.
Huh. I learned something new.
And it correlates with the Sumerian kings lists. Like, each of them around the same number of the people from Adam to Noah. Like, they were said to have lived tens of thousands of years apart, but that's unrealistic, but it's symbolic in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. They definitely had this thing with sacred numbers, and
Yeah.
even today, even till this day, there are people who talk about angel numbers, seeing like 222 or 333 or whatever. Those numbers are just symbolic of something supernatural or whatever, something sacred. And so even today, people hold certain numbers in high regards. We even talk about like seven. We say, "Oh, God, seven is God's favorite number," or whatever. It means complete. Um, so people need to look at that other side of the coin, which people, I'm pretty sure, are not exposed to. But not only do I talk about younger creationism, I do have videos where I talk about atheism, and I talk about I, lately I have been like just in my own personal life, I've been talking to my friends about how do you get from a general idea of God to a more specific idea of God. Like, how do you get from the idea that God exists to this God is the God of Christianity? And I talk about stuff like that on my channel. I talk about how you can accept evolution and still hold to your faith in God. So I think that's probably one of the best playlists on my channel. But talk about a lot, do a lot, and I've been away from the scene for a while, but starting today, actually, I'm starting to get more interviews and debates and everything, so I can get back in there.
Right. At what point did you decide to take up arms against evolution deniers in particular?
It had to be around the time after I renounced younger creationism. About like maybe like 2 months after that, I became a teacher, a long-term substitute science teacher.
Oh,
Um, yeah. And so uh, I just like teaching so much. I said, you know what? Let me just start engaging with younger creationists about what I learned. And actually, the young man Peter Cody, Peter Cordy, um, we Robert Rowley and I we debated Peter with Kent Hovind like what this is probably like 4 years ago now, but not too soon after we debated Kent and Peter, Peter actually changed his mind on evolution because of the conversations we had with Peter behind the scenes after that debate. And so you never know whose mind you might be able to change just from having these conversations over and over again, and just letting people know, look, evolution in no way threatens the core value of our faith or anything like that.
nope.
Jesus is still Lord. God still sits on his throne. If evolution turns
Yeah.
out to be true, so what?
I
And
mean, the most common objection that young Earth creationists make about that is they'll say that, why would God make um, so much death um, first? You know, that's basically the thing. How could God arrange so much suffering and death before creating humans?
Well, it's weird because younger creations have such a big problem with death, but God uses death so he can save us in the death of his son. We're saved by grace through our faith in Jesus Christ because of his death. If it weren't for the fact that Jesus died for our sins, nobody would be saved. So even in death, God can use that for his good. And if younger creationists really do believe that, that God can take all things, good or bad, and use it for his benefit, they shouldn't have a problem with death either.
another objection is that Jesus spoke of Adam and Eve and Cain, Cain, Abel, and Noah, and all of them as real people. I'm like, then they try to, because that goes along with the false dichotomy between, well, you believe Adam and Eve existed or evolution happened. Like the Bible doesn't even say that they're the first humans, and Genesis 4 outright implies that other humans were around
Yeah.
because Cain feared for his life and like, wait, if somebody finds me, they're gonna kill me. I'm like, wait, who was there to kill him? Who was there to avenge Abel? Like, are you gonna wait another like 20 years until their son Seth was born and he'll avenge him? Like what?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, but younger
Well,
creationists,
it's actually pretty funny when you actually go into the story and you find Cain when he gets a mark put on him, which is both it's both a symbol of his sin, but at the same time it's also a protection,
Yeah,
so he doesn't get killed.
that's where I was getting at.
Yeah, so it is interesting, and it's funny that because usually when you go into the stores like with Lot, usually the markings, like there does seem to be a correlation with the whole markings and someone being protected by God, because that's what happened with Lot when like they wanted to. Oh wait, maybe it wasn't Lot. I'm not sure about the story. I know that they had to mark some
Esau.
people. Might be they had to mark some people that who were the innocent ones, and so the non-innocent would be judged.
Yeah. So, what's your position on the people before Abraham? Like, do you take them as real people or archetypes or anything like that? Wayne.
Yeah, Wayne.
oh, do you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I do not think that Adam and Eve were historical figures. I think that Genesis 1 to 3 is more of a poetic polemic against the other gods and Basically, God, it's temple theology, um, which I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with.
Yeah,
Um, but it does get tricky because a lot of younger Christians say, well, the Bible says Adam and Eve had sons and blah 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 blah
and,
blah,
and Jesus spoke of them as real
and
people.
Jesus spoke of them as real people.
You calling Jesus a liar?
Yeah, yeah. And so, it, if you were to explain something like the hydrological cycle to your 4-year-old little kid, would you use the word, I'm gonna I'm gonna tell you about the hydrological system, and I'm gonna teach you about condensation and all this stuff? You would accommodate to the language of your small child so they can understand. Jesus probably could have told the Israelites about evolution and speciation and how things happen from a scientific perspective, but I think that God actually enjoys in us storytelling. There's something very human about humans being able to tell stories, and
Hmm.
we can make our own worlds, and we can problem solve with stories, and we can try and put pieces of things together. And it's something. It's a very human element of humans being able to storytell, and I think God enjoys it.
Yeah,
God,
like with the Exodus, the Hebrews had their own Trojan War.
yeah, yeah. So, like, no, Jesus was not lying when he was talking about Adam and Eve, but it is a little bit more complicated than that. If you want to find out the truth behind these stories, like for example, the story of Noah. In my position, I don't think the story of Noah was written to be a historical account. There's something deeper the author is trying to communicate to his audience. So the story of Noah actually is based on a true event,
Yeah,
but it probably didn't happen exactly the way the biblical author wrote it. What's going on is the flood really did happen, but different cultures are, they all have a common memory, or they all might remember it differently. And what they're doing is they're inserting their theological implications to it. Like, they know there was a flood, but they're trying to explain why they believe the flood happened, and why was it a good thing or why was it a bad thing. And so a lot of different cultures, they believe that the flood basically wiped out the Nephilim and etc. And a lot of them believe it was a good thing. Uh, Um, but I'm sorry, a lot of them believe it was a bad thing because it wiped out their technology and their Nephilim gods or whatever. But the biblical author is saying no, the flood actually was a good thing because humanity would have destroyed themselves, they would have corrupted themselves. And so it, it the flood really was based on a real event that really did happen. Some things might be exaggerated a little bit, but like, was Noah's name in the story actually Noah?
no,
No.
his earliest name was Zui Sudra, or
Utnapishna.
Shtim, or Atrahasis.
Mm-hmm. So like little details like that. Like, was Adam's real name Adam? Was
Yep,
there really a person
and
named Adam?
means mankind.
Yep. Yep. So like, actually these stories are very, very clever, well thought out
Hmm.
um poems and stories about real events. So like, who knows, like, maybe there was a real person named Adam that Abraham descended from, but we know Abraham descended from somewhere because people just don't pop out of existence. Abraham came from somewhere, but as far as we can trace back as a literal historical person, I think the best we would have to go off of is Abraham, but that's still good enough. And also another point I always make is just the fact that Jesus existed. We have historical evidence that Jesus existed. Jesus walked the planet. Jesus died for our sins. Just for the fact that Jesus was a human, that means that Jesus was our cousin. And so, with that being the case, the prophecy in the Old Testament still can be fulfilled, that God would send a man through the lineage of Abraham or etc. to save the world, because we're all related anyway. We're
I
all because
I find dealing with Christ mythos remarkably similar to young Earth creationists.
yeah,
Well, yeah, because they both tend to come from the same fundamentalist backgrounds.
true.
Uh, so I was wondering, uh, Wayne, what do you think more Christians should be doing in order to get other Christians into science?
You know what? That's a very good question because a lot of Christians don't want to get into science, or if they are into science, they're into younger creationism, which is more pseudoscience. So I think that number one, Christians should try and no, number one, if somebody tells you, like I have a friend, we talk about these conversations all the time. He says, "Well, I just don't want to get into science. My field is more evangelism, blah 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 blah." If they really, really, really don't want to, don't
Also,
force it on them. Yeah, yeah, you can't force it on them unless they really want to. But if they do, and the truth about the science and etc., um, definitely always try and break down these things as detailed as you can, because a lot of younger creationists, or even just a lot of people who are in a lot of these different weird beliefs, they are being taught things about the science that's not true, and they have a lot of preconceived notions. Like, for example, some might say, well, most scientists are atheists and they're trying to disprove the Bible and they're trying to disprove God. And so, definitely try and knock out their preconceived notions before you even get to the science. Definitely, you want to have a lot of theological answers ready right off the bat before you even give them the science. Most of the times when most people reject the science, it's usually because of theological reasons first. And then once they get over those theological reasons, like a lot of Christians will say they don't accept evolution. They don't accept evolution because um, humans are made in the image of God. And evolution being true, that means that, oh, humans can't be made in the image of God, right? And so a quick answer to that objection is, well, remember Jesus said God is a spirit. God doesn't have a body. And so just definitely have those theological answers ready, then give them the science. Because like I said, a lot of people only reject the science because of their theology.
I was going to get to something, but I forgot.
Like, it gets like that.
Yeah. Any particular figures, whether they be religious or non-religious, that have been an inspiration to you?
Definitely Dr. Hugh Ross. Love Dr. Hugh Ross. I got to give him a call whenever I get a minute. I used to call him every now and again, just check on him. Uh, Dr. Michael Heiser, of course. Robert Roy of Sentinel Apologetic, Robert and Hunter. Those guys have been my inspiration to me. And I mean, like, we're best friends. I love those guys. Love you guys, man. Um,
What
who
you
else?
How do you feel about Hugh Ross saying that the UFOs and aliens are demons or something?
Uh, I don't know. Honestly, that's a very interesting take. I like it's nothing I haven't heard before, but for Hugh Ross to take, that's an interesting take. But uh, I don't know. I honestly do not know. All I can say is that's very interesting. Um,
It's recently heard about this, and I was like, what?
Well,
so
just remember, when in doubt, demons.
yeah,
Oh yeah, and when it comes to trademark skeptics, when in doubt, the aliens did it.
yeah,
If God rearranged the stars and says, "Believe in me," certain atheists, oh, it must be aliens.
yeah, yeah. That's true. I don't think aliens exist. I just don't think conditions outside of this planet for life exist. At least on the scale that they would be as intelligent as you and I. But if aliens did exist, I mean, we wouldn't know until we know,
Doesn't it seem
unless
like
we met them.
doesn't it seem like wasted space otherwise?
Yeah, basically, yeah. It's one of those things like, okay, like we like unless we know, we won't know about like it's I don't know. It's very trivial to me. I think it's a waste of time. Um, But for what I do know, I know there are other interdimensional beings, spirits, whatever you want to call them. Those things definitely do exist. As Christians, we ought to believe that spirits exist. There are other supernatural entities out here, whether you think they're good or bad. There are other spiritual beings out there, in the spiritual world, and definitely there are other people besides Christians who believe in them. I mean, there are witches who believe in spirits and supernatural and warlocks and stuff like
Like
that. Like
Thor.
that stuff still exists.
Yeah, like Thor.
Yeah,
Zeus
sure.
and Ra.
I don't know. They definitely could exist. They could have been in Yahweh's divine council. I have no idea. Maybe it's possible.
It seems the only rational
Yeah.
explanation for why all these other cultures throughout the world had a pantheon of gods.
Yeah.
Well, you have to remember, man, that the Bible says Jesus is an avenger. So obviously that means he's hanging out with Thor and Loki and Odin.
Ah, and Iron Man, because Iron Man is not a god.
Yeah.
Well, it's been argued that that modern day superheroes are akin to demigods.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Modern day
Well,
superheroes is mythology. Stan
And
Lee
and,
is,
and
yeah.
fun fact, Superman was based on Moses by his creators.
Oh wow. Huh.
oh yeah.
Don't know about that.
Um. Yeah. I know Moses is. Not Moses. I know Superman was his body and his face were based off of real people, like a real bodybuilder and a real like actor. Uh,
Huh.
can't remember their names exactly, but I know they're based off two real people. That's sort of common with all of them. Almost all superheroes have some trace back to some original figure. Because it's easier to draw like that.
Can we just accept that Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Those can't be really another Iron Man outside of him.
No.
There have been other Hulks, but hard to find a definitive one
True.
for him.
I can't remember who was the guy that played him in the Lou Ferrigno.
I don't know, but there's also that guy that played Thor matches him well, even though the real Thor was didn't look anything like that. He was really a really big guy with a hammer, and he couldn't even summon lightning. The myth was that he hits the giants with his hammer so hard that the sound of thunder comes about.
Mm.
Yeah. So another question I got is, oh yeah, I'm trying to think. What is it? Oh, what do you think about this whole growing notion of scientism that seems to be going on in the skeptic community?
Oh yeah, scientism. The only way we can come to truth is through science. And to that I say, have you scientifically proven that? I mean, like it's like everybody knows it's self defeating, or at least everybody who's not into scientism can see it, but the people who are into scientism can't see it for some reason. So it's like it's hard to find something that you're not looking for. You don't know what you don't know because you don't know it. But yeah, scientism is self-defeating, and not all atheists hold to it, not all skeptics hold to it, but to the people who do, I think they believe that science somehow defeats religion, and so they cling to science because they think if I cling to science, then uh, that's my way of proving there is no God. Which, by the way, you could never scientifically prove or disprove that God exists, being that God is more of a philosophical notion. So there's that, but unless you can put God in a laboratory and run experiments on him, you are not going to scientifically prove anything or disprove anything about God. Um,
Yeah, you have to remember though, obviously that means that, faith is believing what you know ain't so.
Not
true.
so, Mr. Twain.
So yeah, scientism definitely it's it's a non-issue, because it'll die out on its own more than likely. And the people who do hold to it, once they, I've noticed that once a non-believer or anybody, it could even be a Christian, once somebody takes that extra step to fact check their beliefs. Like, for example, have you ever been on Google when you just, I don't know, you Google something that might falsify your opinion? Like, once you have the ability to do that and not be afraid, then you're one step closer to the truth anyway. So all it will take is for one of these skeptics or whoever to just Google something about like scientism. And there's so many different websites that tackle this, like crossexamine.com or even William Lane Craig's website. It's so much stuff. It's so many resources out here. I'm not afraid. More people will be saved more than ever, more than likely, because of the internet, because of YouTube. All people have to do is go and look. I mean, look at Kanye West. Kanye West just got saved, and I can guarantee you, before Kanye West got saved, what did he probably do? He probably was Googling stuff. He probably went to the internet so he can find out information. We live in an information age, so definitely.
Also an age of propaganda.
Yeah, that's true too. So, but even through all the propaganda and everything, God's still saving people, and we don't have anything to be afraid of.
And Sygart and Sarah Salviender and scientists like them have contested the notion that most scientists are atheists.
I think it depends on the field, because I know in astronomy most astronomers actually are theists. It seems like the biggest field that atheists come from, like the field of biology,
and cosmology, they'll say.
Well, maybe, but
it just baffles my mind how that could be so.
It's possible, but also that doesn't prove anything, because there was a time thousands of years ago where most scientists were theists. Did that prove that God exists? No, it just proved that most scientists believed that God existed. So that's it.
Yeah, like around 90% of the pioneers of modern science were Christians and Muslims.
Well, Newton technically was a heretic.
Technically. And did you guys even know that Muslims created algebra?
Yep.
Algebra is Arabic, so I mean, like,
and algorithms.
Yep.
Well, there is like, it all depends on how you really define it, because the term algebra was actually a translation error, because it comes from a Muslim named Al Jabra, like Jabr. And what happened was when they were translating everything, like translating his mathematics into the European, like the Latin, they translated it poorly and it became algebra.
And this one Muslim scientist, I forgot his name, where algorithms come from. It was his Latinized name, algorithmy.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Like when you get a bunch of translation errors and no one actually bothers to go back and fix it, so we just have this common notion of stuff.
Yeah.
It's sort of like Indians. It's sort of like the Indians. Like, the whole notion comes from when Columbus came over and he thought he was in India. Yep. But we still call them Indians, even though it was a mistake of Columbus.
Well, the name has a ring to it. How do you think scientists like Kepler would look at uber materialists like Nihilist deGrasse Tyson and guys like them?
And Kepler was a theist, right?
Yep.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is a very, when it comes to his atheism, he's a very arrogant person.
Even though he denies being an atheist, he calls himself agnostic, but he talks very much like an atheist.
Yeah, he does talk very much like an atheist. Yeah, but him being agnostic, him being agnostic. He knows a very great deal about science. Yeah. But when he talks about philosophy and theology, it just shows that
and history.
Yeah. He just doesn't know. Like, for example, he was talking about hyperdimensions, and he was talking about how higher dimensions, and if he were to see, for example, if his desk were filled with papers and a hand came from the fourth dimension and it took the papers on his desk and took those papers into another plane of space that he couldn't see, he would believe in aliens or higher dimensional beings.
Yep.
And did we not see that exact thing in the Old Testament at Belteshazzar? What's his name? Belteshazzar's feast.
Belshazzar. Yeah.
Belshazzar. There you go. We saw. I mean, we
Oh
saw
yeah,
the exact same. A hand comes
yeah,
out from another dimension, writes on the wall, and it disappears because it goes to another plane of space that we can't see it.
And that too is another story.
Yeah, it's a whole nother story. But
Yeah.
he says, "Oh, this is what I would expect to see," and then this Old Testament book actually has that exact example in it. But I'm pretty sure Neil deGrasse Tyson has never heard of it. I'm pretty sure.
Nope.
Because if he did, he would have probably cross-referenced it to that verse.
He also thinks Christians, the big bad church that persecuted scientists, and that Bruno was a scientist himself, even though he was a hermetic loon.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little bit strong. You know, Bernardo Bruno was a smart man. He was just
He was smart, he just wasn't a scientist.
yeah. He was he was more of a mystic for his time, but he was smart he just was just more of a mystic than he was a scientist, which a lot of atheists get confused with. They think that he's this big scientist when he was, if anything, a mystic. I remember, what's funny enough, Neil deGrasse Tyson also said that people in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat. I'm like,
People know the world was round centuries before Jesus was even born.
yeah, the ancient Greeks had figured that out, and really, like everyone, even at Columbus's time, like all the educated men knew the Earth was round. So, and, you know, that whole notion comes from Washington Irving. You know, the guy that made the Headless Horseman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sleepy Hollow. It all comes from him because he wrote a biography on Christopher Columbus and he made up a whole bunch of lies.
And there's all these myths on the. Of course, you know about the myth of Galileo being persecuted is just bullshit, frankly.
Isn't so? You this is very ironic because I just was at a library maybe like 3 weeks ago, and I was reading a philosophy book on this, and supposedly the church had put the Catholic Church had put Galileo on house arrest until he died, allegedly.
They think he was put in a prison in a dungeon and tortured until he recanted.
Well,
that he was put under house arrest because of his science, even though they did it because he was a douche.
he had an Italian temper, you could say, where what was like the whole thing was more political than it was anything else because basically he was told by the church, like, because you have to remember, telling off the church is like telling off the Pope was like telling off your boss because it was the church that funded him and his work. So, and he was told by, you know, his boss was that he needs to write a book on geocentrism and heliocentrism, but the only thing he couldn't do was promote heliocentrism in the book. And guess what he did? He promoted heliocentrism in the book, even though he knew he couldn't prove it.
Yeah,
and
that's the thing. That was the science of the day, and if you can't prove it, then it's not science, according to them.
Well, yeah, and the thing was that even back then, like, I always found it funny because I said if Galileo would have been wrong, like in the world, it really would have been geocentrism that was true. I hardly think that Galileo would have had such a prominence that he is now. He would just have been considered a loon, and that the church got it right to put him away. Like,
you ever find it weird that Newton never had these problems?
Well, yeah, it's always just funny with it. Like, yeah, so
deny the Trinity outright.
Well, yeah, that's what I said. Newton was a heretic by all means. Like, there's nothing like you understand about like he didn't believe in the Trinity. He thought worshiping Jesus like a god was idolatry, and you know so
He wasn't imprisoned or tortured or forced to recant anything.
well that's because mainly he hid like his books weren't published until after his death.
Yeah, like Copernicus.
Well, his theology books, that is. His regular science books were published, before his death, but not his theology books. That's another thing that people get with Copernicus is they say Copernicus, waited until his death to release his book on heliocentrism because he was worried that the church would persecute him for it. I'm like, if that was the case, why did he dedicate the book to the Pope?
And why didn't he renounce God right then and there if he didn't believe?
Well, yeah, and it's just silly. The reason why he waited so long to publish it and wait until after his death because he was a perfectionist. And, that's a noted thing. He was a perfectionist, and he figured that, he could, since he didn't really have much time to live, he wanted to make sure he had everything to the best of his ability, and he knew his models had problems with them. And they do. If you actually read what he published in his book, you really couldn't tell the difference between his theology and his science. Really, it's a mix of both.
But anyway, where do you teach science? Middle school or high school?
I taught science. I don't teach anymore, but I taught science from grades 8th, so actually from grades 8th all the way to 12th. And I don't do it anymore, but I am thinking about doing it. But we shall see.
What made you stop?
One, pursue higher education and better job. Teaching is great, but you can't pay your bills off teaching. Most teaching jobs.
Oh, was it a public school?
Yep.
All right, then
the secular public school system, you're better off.
Yeah.
Better off not teaching that.
You could have just become a Burger King worker and you'd make just about the same.
Pretty much. You're not lying. Pretty much. So, but I loved it. I love the kids. I taught my kids about trigonometric parallax. I taught my kids about time theory A and time theory B. I mean, my kids had fun and they learned. Kids actually like learning when it's not boring and it actually relates to their life.
You gotta have a gift to make it entertaining when you teach.
Yeah. And a lot of kids need that. They need to know that science is not boring. Science is awesome. And you can use it in almost every aspect of your everyday life. So, I miss it. I miss the kids. Yeah. I miss teaching. It was awesome.
Yeah. So, Wayne, did you know that Behemoth is a dinosaur and a dinosaur is he?
And Leviathan.
I have heard. I have heard so many times. I think younger Christians get that from the Book of Job. I have one more confession, as far as my wacky beliefs. Younger Christians would say, I don't think the Book of Job was written to be historical either.
No.
Especially, it's one of the oldest books in the Bible. It's probably older than Genesis.
That's not exactly true. The linguistics and writing patterns, they seem to indicate that it was written during the exile because it reflected the existential angst that the Hebrews felt.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
the reason why people assume it's the oldest is because the author tried to make it more authentic by using words and vowels or some other writing styles from far back in foreign countries. They try to give it a foreign spin.
Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
Another hidden detail that it didn't happen. Not to mean the truth values of the story can still be true. Like,
it's divinely inspired fiction to relate to
yes,
people who are like,
yes,
why me?
Yes, yes. And I just wish younger creationists and other people who are like biblical literates, they will understand that you're not taking away from the inspiration of the scriptures if you're looking at the scriptures in the context it was written in. If somebody wrote the story to be just a story, it's not wrong that you look at it as just a story. it's not,
Oh,
it's
the scripture is God breathed. Then I'm like, yeah, dictation, like inspiration does not equal dictation. This is not a, like Heiser said the other night. This is not an X Files episode.
yeah, yeah.
Well, you have to remember that apparently, according to Kent Hovind, Adam wrote Genesis 1.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
Yeah, there's like so many
People,
problems with
people,
that
people
I
didn't
can't.
people didn't even write, even if we take the fort to 6,000 years ago. People didn't write until 5,000 years ago.
Oh boy. Kent Hovind is a
He's
he's
quite the character.
yeah.
He's the carrier of Christianity. No, wait, that's Ken Ham and Cheese.
Oh yeah. But definitely just from the I'll give you one example about why I think the Book of Job might be more fiction than people think. In the Book of Genesis, the repetitive phrase "and then God said," and then God said, and then God said comes up again and again and again, and that's how you know it's a poem. Job has this same type of writing, and you guys might be able to pick up on it before I even say it. Um, when Job's family dies and all these things happen, what happens? And then the servant comes, and like it's the same phrase where the servant says, and then I alone have come to tell you this, and then I alone, and then it's the same phrasing that you see in Genesis again and again, and then God said, and then God said. So that's another reason why I would say it's probably fiction. Then
Same,
also
same, same with Daniel and them.
mm-hmm,
Well, I mean, as long as you recognize that it's all written by a bunch of illiterate Bronze Age goat herders.
oh boy. um we're not talking about the Quran here.
No, they're written by Iron Age sheep herders. Bronze and Iron Age ended long before that.
Yeah, I always found that funny. It's like it wasn't written in like the only books you can really say that may have been written in the Bronze Age is Genesis 1 and Job. That's it.
Like, no, they're both exile.
Yeah, but that's only if you date them. Like if
Nearly
they were,
nearly the end of the Iron Age.
yeah, yeah, and that's only if you date them. Like if you take like a really think liberal view, that's how you get it like to the Bronze Age with either one. But you could easily put it up, like move it up a little bit, and you'll be in the Iron Age.
Mm.
So I mean, it is a big thing whether or not there was actually any books that were written actually in the Bronze Age in the Bible. Uh, Given the context. I always find it funny because people
can date the Song of the Sea of Moses all the way back to near the Bronze Age collapse, but that's just going. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Moses wasn't his real name; it was probably Ra Moses or something like that.
That's
Since since Moses is an Egyptian name, and they later Hebrew were like, wait a minute, our central guy is Egyptian, and he has another god a part of his name. Well, that doesn't look well for us. Okay, let's just get rid of Ra or whatever god was as part of his name, and make him Moses, self-made man.
That's
well,
very
yeah, because
interesting.
Moses in of itself is only means son of. Well,
Son of who?
yeah, that's the question. Like son of
Ah.
who?
Son of Ra.
Yeah, that would make more sense. Like Moses, which I actually like the story when because all the plagues are supposed to be symbolic of the Egyptian gods.
Yep, and their attacks on the Egyptian gods.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible is just pretty much a lot of polemics
Yes.
against the pagans of their time.
Shots fired.
Yeah, they really, if there's anything you could say about the Bible is that they really hated pagans.
Yeah, you can see that. Yeah.
Don't be like pagans.
Well,
Yeah.
you have to remember, man, you obviously can't wear a mixture of two fabrics.
Nope.
And yeah, and you definitely have to go on a kosher diet, even though, like, I'm sure the Jesus guy, he sort of fixed that.
Yeah.
I've always found that funny because I know a bunch of atheists that will go after Christians and say, "Well, you don't follow the Bible all the way because you eat shellfish and you wear a mixture of two fabrics." I'm like, how did you not know this? Like, this is something I knew, and I was a liberal Christian. Like,
And they'll always point to not one iota of, or one ink less or something. I'm butchering it, but said until all is fulfilled. And I'm like, yeah, he did fulfill it on the cross.
There you go.
yeah, and I'm like, I also say, like, I believe they had a verse where it said the law will never be gone or destroyed, and I'm saying
Yep.
it
Yeah,
isn't.
that's one.
I said it isn't. If you want to join the covenant, you can still do that. It's just that with Christianity now, it's not obligatory. It's not, you don't have to.
No, but the dietary laws were eternally binding.
What?
Well,
They'll just come up with that sort of thing.
Well, Jesus is the one. Jesus is the real deal because he allows his people to eat bacon.
And chops. Never have it without a sweet baby rays.
All right. Well, we're coming up on the hour mark.
All right. You have any closing thoughts? Anything else you want to share?
Definitely. Well, first, I want to thank you guys for inviting me on. That's number one. Secondly, as a science enthusiast and as a Christian, I just want to let people know that you can still accept science and believe in God. And that is basically it. There should be no reason why science should ever make you feel like you shouldn't believe in God anymore, or that science in any way disproves God, or it should shake your faith. Um, I think, was it Billy Graham or was it somebody else where they said this is God's universe, and anything we find out about God's universe, it shouldn't shake us up. But that's pretty much it. Those would be my closing remarks.
Science is the slow revelation of God's blueprint.
Boom, there you go.
Yeah, and I believe as long as I find it great that both atheists and Christians, along with other Jews and Muslims, can all come together and bash the young Earth creationist.
You're gonna make them cry.
We can agree on. But yeah, I would say it was great having you on, Wayne. It was, it was nice. I didn't hear about, like, Engine had told me about, like, History Net had told me about it a couple of days ago that we had gotten you, and I thought that would be great because I've seen all your talks with Robert Rowe. I've seen your little debate with Steve McRae. Yeah. So yeah, I thought it was very nice to be able to have you on and talk science and the Bible.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
All right. So
this has been Purple Pill Religion, Purple Pill Philosophy. Interviewing the science enthusiast. Go subscribe to him, and signing off.